So 8 years ago, the world watched with great expectations and not without a little jealousy, as a first-time senator with great oratorial skills took office as president of the most powerful nation in the world and promised us change, hope, and dreams of a better world. And for a world which was fed up with George W. Bush's wars and interventions, Obama, who spoke of multilateralism, a nuclear-free world, and of focusing on the home front instead of promoting democracy, was a sane and I think a refreshing change, and the world expected the world from him, literally. President Obama's most important foreign policy goal when he was elected was to restore America's moral supremacy and legitimacy, and these were the key themes in his candidacy. 8 years later, has Obama lived up to these expectations? And that's what I'm going to assess over the next 10-15 minutes. But first, I'm going to start with some of the influences on Obama. The first, of course, is the foreign and security policy legacy of the Democratic Party, which is essentially liberal and neoliberal. It's basically a Wilsonian and partially Jeffersonian tradition, which form the background of the Democrat Party's ideology when it comes to foreign policy. And this emphasizes international institutions and multilateralism and democratic institutions and expansionism, but not by using hard power or regime change, but through soft power. Again, in an article in Foreign Affairs, Obama himself described his basic foreign policy philosophy in a classical liberal or Wilsonian way, stressing that the security and wealth of Americans is connected with the wealth of people living beyond the borders of the United States. And finally, I think his own multicultural upbringing has contributed to his thinking on foreign policy. I'm going to quickly look at some countries and issues on which his foreign policy has had an effect. And I'm going to completely skip the Middle East because Stanley has already given us great insights on the Middle East. And I more or less agree with what he said. Okay, I cannot skip Iran because I still think it's an enduring legacy. So the nuclear deal with Iran will remain a lasting legacy of Obama. And this is in consonance with the liberal foreign policy tradition, which holds that countries will cooperate if you have enough goodwill and confidence among them. Now, let's be very clear that whatever Obama did was not easy, because he faced a lot of opposition on Capitol Hill from the Republicans and also from the non-proliferation lobby on Capitol Hill. And it required tremendous courage to make a deal with a country which has insisted on calling America the great Satan for so many years now. And he's also had to withstand pressure from Israel and Saudi Arabia, and had to prevent Israel from carrying out a preemptive war on Iran's nuclear sites. The second major legacy, I think, is the opening up to Cuba. Again, this is no mean achievement because the US has not had diplomatic relations with Cuba since the 1960s. And despite the opening, some of the sanctions on Cuba is yet to be lifted. Again, something which really caught the world's attention was Obama's promise to work towards a nuclear-free world. And in Prague, he said that he's going to put an end to reduce the role of nuclear weapons in US national security strategy and to start reducing our arsenal. Subsequently, he signed the START II agreement with Russia, but this was, of course, a far cry from a nuclear-free world. He organized 4 nuclear security summits, but then he also approved what is a modernization project worth over $1 trillion over the next 30 years. And this would include 5 new warheads, and this, in the future, could probably lead to another arms race from both Russia and China. In fact, a recent report of the Federation of Atomic Scientists says that the Obama administration has reduced the US stockpile less than any other post-Cold War administration. This is where Stanley's analysis is correct, that he's really not a pacifist president. But he did succeed on the nuclear deal with Iran, but he's not succeeded in doing anything with regard to North Korea, which keeps testing missiles. So basically, this whole project of a nuclear-free world has been a failure. On climate change, this is again something which was a priority for Obama, and he's described it as the greatest long-term threat to the world. He did help to push through the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and he formally ratified the Paris Agreement early this month. And getting China on board on the Paris Agreement and to explore emissions of HFCs itself, I think it's a great diplomatic victory, because the Chinese initially were very reluctant to discuss climate change. And today's newspapers tell me that India is also going to ratify the agreement very soon. At the domestic level also, he's enacted rules to cut emissions across, whether it's cars or coal plants, even though he's going to face opposition from the coal states. The legality of these rules, of course, will be decided by the Supreme Court. There is already a stay on this by the Supreme Court, but there's going to be an appeal. Anyway, he believes that this is going to be his more enduring legacy, and that, I think, might well be true. Then there is the TPP and the TTIP. I think one of Obama's key trade initiatives has been the TPP, which will bring together 12 countries across the Pacific Rim. And I believe that it's the economic part of the rebalance to Asia, to manage China's rise, because China's neighbors don't want to be overly dependent on China, and they want an enduring US presence in the region. But again, this has not been passed in the Congress, though Obama has said that he'll try and push it in the lame duck Congress. If you look at the recent debates in the US presidential election, you will notice that both Trump and Clinton have said that they're going to oppose the TPP. Clinton once pushed for the TPP, and she said it was the gold standard in free trade. Now she's turned away because, like someone earlier said, the people are against established. They feel that free trade will cost them jobs. Meanwhile, the negotiation on the TPP have also failed. Okay, I have a couple of slides on Iraq and Libya, which I'm going to skip. Okay, so then I'll talk about Afghanistan. This is one place where, again, Obama talked about withdrawing from Afghanistan. Then he talked of a drawback when he saw that the situation was not improving. And then he talked about a surge. So he's going to leave 8,400 troops till the end of his tenure. And this is something that he really did not want. He wanted only around 5,000 troops. I think it is legitimate to say that his surge really helped the Taliban to wait the US forces out. Because since he had given an end date for the withdrawal, they were able to wait the US forces out. And at points, he had elements of the right approach, more troops, more reconstruction, and a counter-insurgency strategy. But he really did not give them enough time and resources to succeed. And today, the Taliban controls more territory than at any time since 2001. So competent functioning institutions have to be a precondition for any sort of future stability in Afghanistan, and Obama has done nothing to address this particular strategic defect. And I would think his policy towards Russia has been one of the biggest failures, and one which has long-term implications for the global order. So while he started on a positive note with the reset, events in Ukraine overtook the relationship. And here, despite Obama's inherent disinclination to intervene, he was done in by the State Department and by liberal interventionist hawks like Susan Rice and Samantha Power and Victoria Nuland. And once these people had intervened and they come out on the streets supporting the protests at Maidan, there was little that Obama really could have done. And I think the State Department really should have anticipated Russia's response. The only saving grace, I think, was that Obama refused to send troops and weapons into Ukraine. Obama's refusal to treat Russia as an equal and the relentless expansion by NATO has really ruptured relations with Russia. And I think more worryingly for us in India, it is pushing Russia further into Chinese arms. Moreover, I think if at all tensions between US and China escalate, it's likely that in the future the US will have to face a Russia-China alliance. Which brings me to the elephant in the room, China. Initially, 5 minutes more, Dawson? Yeah. So initially, Obama started off with a cooperative strategy with Beijing. He wanted to offer strategic security reassurances to Beijing to partner with the United States in solving global common problems. Now, in 2009, he talked about reconciling with China, helping China grow. But then he also said that he was not going to help to contain China. So at that point, everyone talked about a G2. Right? So in the first year of his administration, the administration did not sell arms to Taiwan. Obama refused to meet the Dalai Lama. But Beijing did not respond to these overtures, and soon relations went back to normal in the sense that he started to meet the Dalai Lama, and then arms started being sold to Taiwan again. Which brings us to his main strategy for dealing with China, which was the pivot or the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. The idea behind the rebalance was to reassure allies that the US intends to remain in the area and that it will protect them if at all required against assertive and assertive China. More generally, the US has implemented a nuanced strategy, balancing pockets of competition and cooperation with Beijing, which has resulted in some agreements like the climate change agreement in Paris, the maritime risk reduction protocols, counter-proliferation with regard to Iran, and on cybersecurity. But the main challenge in the relationship has been the tensions in the South China Sea and the East China Seas. The Obama administration, I think, has a mixed record on China. It has been particularly effective in boosting US diplomatic and military presence in the Asia-Pacific, and it has contained and managed tensions whenever they have cropped up. But even today, the allies do not really feel reassured that the US will come to the rescue if at all there is a problem in the area. What he has done is to ensure institutionalization of US presence in the Asia-Pacific. But we must also remember that this is a time of transition, and since both countries are very economically interdependent on each other, the usual metaphors of the Cold War really do not apply to US-China relations. And the US has also not faced the kind of challenge to its hegemony and liberal international order that China has posed in a very long time. Let me then come to India. Obama clearly started off on a wrong note on India because in his first visit to China, he talked about the two of them cooperating to promote stability in South Asia, and which we saw obviously as a G2 arrangement. We weren't too happy with it. Again, our strategic analysts were not very happy with it because we thought a Democrat president is not good for India. Of course, conveniently forgetting about Nixon's tilt to Pakistan and Kennedy's support for India during the India-China war. But since then, the bilateral relationship has gone a long way. The trade is up $100 billion. Defense trade is crossed $10 billion. We do more military exercises with the US than with any other country. We are a major defense partner of the US. But for all of the rhetoric, we are still not members of the multilateral export control regimes. And the Senate has still failed to recognize India as a global strategic and defense partner. But Obama has continued the bipartisan consensus on better relations with India, and this is likely to continue in the light of concerns about India. The major negative for us is, of course, US policy towards Pakistan. They still refuse to call it a terrorist state. So is there an Obama doctrine? He says the doctrine is don't do stupid shit. So pardon my language, but that's the language that the president used. But there is no doctrine as such, but there are some elements to it, which is there is flexibility, there is lack of obstinacy. I mean, because faced with similar situations in both Libya and Syria, he used very different approaches, signaling that he's learned some lessons from Libya. He was flexible enough to work with Russia. Another element, I think, is strategic restraint in most situations, and that there will be no free riders. So in conclusion, the positives are the Iran deal, the opening to Cuba, the climate change agreement, the prevention of another terrorist attack on American soil. He's led the deal with Iran. The negatives are that there were misplaced expectations on the nuclear-free world, the Russia policy, the rise of ISIS. Again, he's not been able to extricate the US completely from Afghanistan and Iraq. He's not been able to reset the United States' relationship with the Muslim world. Guantanamo Bay is still open. And I think perhaps we and Obama himself really underestimated the influence of the foreign policy establishment, or what Professor Srinivasan called the deep state. But his foreign policy has not been a left-wing policy, because the US is still committed to to the defense of 60 other countries, and in protecting the global commons. It still has got a forward-deployed military. The United States still enjoys the world's strongest military power, costing $600 billion a year. Its nearest competitor, China, spends about $150 billion. So essentially, I think Obama's politics pulled him in two very different directions, between his anti-war liberal base, which got him elected in the first place, and the pro-army and the conservatives whose support he really needed for election and for maintaining. Since I'm a university professor, I like grading people, so I think he'll rank really high among the US presidents. His foreign policy has been in consonance with the decline of America's ability to effect global change, which is why there is an emphasis on burden sharing and partnerships and alliances. I'd probably give him 7 out of 10 on foreign policy, given the mess that he inherited and the almost unprecedented challenges that he faced, whether it was the recession, the Arab Spring, the Ukraine crisis, or tensions around the South and East China Seas, and also the extreme bipartisanship that he faced on Capitol Hill. Finally, let me leave you with a ironical thought. It's not Clinton but Trump whom Obama clearly despises, who will be carrying forward Obama's foreign policy legacy, because whether it's better relations with Russia, focusing on the economy, forcing allies to share the burden, I leave you with that thought, and thank you for listening.